It's really quite interesting that we hear in the Gospel of Matthew this passage in which Jesus says, "First go to the people of Israel." Matthew writes for a community that is a mixture of both Gentile and Jewish Christians, and yet he makes clear that there is a preference for the people of Israel because God has made a covenant with them. As the Second Vatican Council reminds us, it is an irrevocable covenant. And it is important for us to keep that in mind because Christianity did not in any way abolish that covenant, but rather we hear in the Eucharistic prayer there is a new covenant in Jesus. But it is also important for us to always be respectful of the sons and daughters of Abraham, our Jewish brothers and sisters, because they enjoy the irrevocable covenant with God. And at the same time, we can look to that covenant as we think about our own relationship with God as Christians to see some points of reference for ourselves. Notice in the first reading that God makes a covenant with His people as an invitation, not a demand. He reminds them of how they were saved as they were freed from Egypt. And yet, there's no coercion. God gives an invitation. Jesus as well, we see in the temptations that he is tempted to throw himself off the building so that the angels can catch him and that way stun people into belief. But Jesus does nothing to coerce or force belief. In fact, all of his miracles are always aimed at bringing healing and restoring people to the community, not to force belief of other people. And that is why the Church continues to say that our evangelization may never fall into a type of proselytism where we coerce people into believing or we pressure them, but rather we keep in mind that God's covenant is an invitation. The second thing we see that God makes a covenant with people by gathering them together. He highlights how all of our human lives are less when we try to live alone. It is by gathering a people together that we really become the human beings that God calls us to be. That's so important for us in our day when we think about our democracy. Surely a democracy has to have the principle of equal representation, where everyone can have a say in the form of government. But it also should be the kind of government that allows people to really flourish as individuals, to become the human beings that they are. That is the principle of God's covenant as well. How is it that our gathering to community will allow us to grow into the people God has always wanted us to be? And we also then see that God's covenant involves how God accompanies his people. From the first pages of Scripture, we see in the Garden of Eden that God walks along with Adam and Eve. He walks in the garden. Even when they have failed, he still walks into their presence. God walks with us. So too, our Christian faith reminds us that Jesus walks with us. And that's why Christianity from the very beginning was always referred to as the way. It's a reminder that we're always on pilgrimage. We always take step by step in our lives. Yes, God's covenant with the sons and daughters of Abraham is irrevocable. And that is why we should have nothing ever to do with anti-Semitism and be willing, in fact, to raise our voices when the ugly head of anti-Semitism comes into society, when people attack Jewish people. We are there as their brothers and sisters at their defense, because we all together worship a God who calls us into covenant. Yes, in different ways, but always respectful of the irrevocable covenant that God has with the Jewish people, a covenant that reminds us how we should walk each day of our lives, responding to the invitation of God freely, having a sense of the importance of gathering together in community, and finally, with a deep confidence and trust that along the path of our journey in life, God is with us every step of the way. It is important for us to take seriously the covenant given to us, a covenant that in fact allows each one of us to enter into a relationship with God that truly makes us human and brings life.